A devoted wife from Columbus, Ohio, discovered her husband of 15 years had been living secret lives across 3 different states, maintaining separate families with different identities. But when she finally confronted him about his web of deception, what happened next would leave her fighting for her life and expose the terrifying lengths some people will go to protect their lies. Rebecca Thompson had always believed in the power of trust. At 42 years old, she had built what appeared to be a perfect life in the quiet suburbs of Columbus, Ohio. Her 2-story colonial home sat nestled between towering oak trees, complete with a white picket fence that seemed pulled straight from a magazine cover. For 15 years, she had shared this dream with her husband, Marcus, a man she met during her college years at Ohio State University. Marcus Thompson was the kind of husband most women envied their friends for having. At 45, he maintained his athletic build from his college football days, standing 6 feet tall, with salt and pepper hair that gave him a distinguished appearance. He worked as a regional sales manager for a medical equipment company, a job that required frequent travel across the Midwest. His career success afforded Rebecca the luxury of working part-time as a freelance graphic designer, allowing her to focus on their 2 children, 16-year-old Tyler and 13-year-old Madison. Their marriage seemed to follow a predictable but comfortable routine. Marcus would leave on Monday mornings, his black leather briefcase in hand, and his warm smile promising to return by Friday evening. He would kiss Rebecca goodbye at the front door, ruffle Tyler's hair, and remind Madison to help her mother with the dishes. These weekly departures had become so normal that Rebecca barely noticed the pattern anymore. Rebecca prided herself on being an attentive mother and supportive wife. She attended every one of Tyler's basketball games, helped Madison with her science projects, and maintained their home with meticulous care. When Marcus returned from his business trips, she would prepare his favorite meals and listen intently as he shared stories about difficult clients and successful deals. Their weekends were filled with family activities, visits to the local farmers market, movie nights in their cozy living room, and Sunday dinners that brought extended family together. From the outside, the Thompsons represented everything a successful American family should be. Their friends often commented on how lucky Rebecca was to have found such a devoted husband. Marcus never forgot birthdays or anniversaries, always bringing thoughtful gifts from his travels. He attended parent-teacher conferences, coached Tyler's Little League team during summers, and took Madison to father-daughter dances at her school. Yet beneath this perfect exterior, small cracks had begun to appear. Rebecca first noticed them about 18 months ago, though she dismissed her concerns as typical marital adjustments. Marcus's phone habits had changed dramatically. Where he once left his device casually on kitchen counters or bedroom nightstands, he now kept it constantly by his side. Even during family dinners, his phone remained face down next to his plate, and he would excuse himself to take calls that he claimed were work-related emergencies. His travel schedule had also intensified. What started as 3-day trips had stretched into week-long absences. Marcus explained these extensions as necessary for landing bigger accounts and expanding his territory. He spoke enthusiastically about potential promotions and increased commission opportunities that would secure their family's financial future. Rebecca wanted to support his ambitions, but she could not shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The intimacy between them had gradually diminished as well. Marcus often returned from trips claiming exhaustion, preferring to fall asleep watching television rather than engaging in meaningful conversation. Their physical relationship had become perfunctory, lacking the passion and connection that once defined their marriage. When Rebecca tried to address these changes, Marcus would deflect with humor or promises to plan a romantic getaway once his current projects concluded. Rebecca began to notice inconsistencies in Marcus's travel stories. He would mention meeting with clients in Chicago, only to later reference the same meetings happening in Detroit. Restaurant recommendations he offered from supposedly recent business dinners did not match the cities he claimed to visit. When Rebecca gently questioned these discrepancies, Marcus would laugh them off as signs of his hectic schedule, causing confusion. The breaking point came on a cold February morning when Rebecca decided to surprise Marcus by delivering lunch to his office. She had prepared his favorite sandwich and drove downtown during her lunch break, excited to see his face light up with the unexpected gesture. However, when she arrived at the gleaming office building where Marcus claimed to work, The receptionist informed her that no one by that name was employed there. In fact, the medical equipment company Marcus supposedly worked for had never operated from that location. Rebecca sat in her car in the parking garage for nearly an hour, her hands trembling as she tried to process this revelation. 15 years of marriage, 2 children, a shared mortgage, joint bank accounts, and countless intimate moments had all been built on what appeared to be a fundamental lie. The man she had trusted with her heart, her body, and her future had been deceiving her about something as basic as where he spent 40 hours each week. That evening, Rebecca waited for Marcus to return from his latest business trip, her mind racing with questions and fears. She had decided to confront him directly about the office building, hoping there would be a reasonable explanation. Perhaps his company had relocated, or maybe he worked from a different location than the one listed in their old records. She clung to these possibilities like lifelines, desperate to preserve the foundation of her world. Marcus arrived home at his usual Friday evening time, carrying his familiar black briefcase, and wearing the tired but happy expression he always displayed after a successful week on the road. He hugged Rebecca warmly, asked about the children's week, and began sharing details about a particularly challenging client presentation in Indianapolis. His performance was flawless, betraying no hint of deception or nervousness. Over dinner, Rebecca carefully broached the subject of his office location. She mentioned wanting to send flowers to his workplace for an upcoming promotion he had been discussing. Marcus's response was smooth and immediate. His company had indeed relocated to a temporary space while their main offices underwent renovation. He provided a new address, and even suggested Rebecca wait until they moved back to their permanent location before sending anything. The lie rolled off his tongue with such practiced ease that Rebecca felt simultaneously relieved and deeply disturbed. Part of her wanted to accept his explanation and return to their comfortable routine. However, a stronger instinct urged her to investigate further. That night, after Marcus fell asleep, Rebecca crept downstairs to her home office and began researching the medical equipment company he claimed to represent. What she discovered sent ice through her veins. The company was real, but their employee directory contained no record of Marcus Thompson. Their sales territories did not include the states Marcus regularly visited. Most damning of all, their corporate headquarters had never been located at either address Marcus had provided. Rebecca spent hours scouring the internet, cross-referencing business licenses, and even calling the company's human resources department under the pretense of verifying employment for a credit application. The evidence was undeniable. Marcus did not work where he claimed to work. This revelation opened a floodgate of questions that Rebecca had been unconsciously suppressing for months. If he was not conducting business meetings, where did he spend those long weeks away from home? What was the source of the income that supported their comfortable lifestyle? Who was he really calling during those private phone conversations? Rebecca's next discovery came through examining their credit card statements, documents she had largely ignored since Marcus handled most of their financial management. She found charges in cities he had never mentioned visiting, at restaurants during dates she knew he was supposed to be in client meetings, and most troubling of all, recurring charges at jewelry stores in Tennessee and Florida. The jewelry purchases were substantial, far more expensive than anything Marcus had ever given her, and they occurred with suspicious regularity around Valentine's Day, Christmas, and other romantic holidays. The pattern became clearer as Rebecca dug deeper into their financial records. Marcus maintained separate credit cards that he paid from accounts Rebecca had no access to. She discovered these additional financial instruments when pre-approved credit offers began arriving in their mail, referencing existing relationships with banks she had never heard of. Each revelation felt like another blow to her already shattered sense of reality. Rebecca's investigation intensified over the following weeks. She hired a private investigator named Detective Rodriguez, a former police officer who specialized in matrimonial cases. Rodriguez's initial findings confirmed Rebecca's worst fears. Marcus maintained at least 2 other residences, one in Nashville, Tennessee, and another in Tampa, Florida. More devastating still, he appeared to be living with other women in both locations. The photographs Rodriguez provided were like physical blows to Rebecca's chest. Marcus walking hand in hand with a brunette woman outside a Nashville restaurant, the same intimate gesture he had shared with Rebecca countless times. Marcus kissing a blonde woman goodbye outside a Tampa apartment complex, displaying the same tenderness Rebecca had once believed was reserved exclusively for her. These women were not casual affairs or business associates. They carried themselves with the comfortable familiarity of long-term partners. Rodriguez's final report painted a picture so devastating that Rebecca initially refused to believe it. Marcus Thompson had been maintaining 3 separate identities across 3 different states. In Tennessee, he was Michael Turner, married to Patricia Wells, a nurse at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. In Florida, he was Martin Torres, engaged to Grace Sullivan, a kindergarten teacher in Tampa. Each woman believed she was his only romantic relationship, and both Patricia and Grace displayed the same trusting devotion that Rebecca had felt for 15 years. The logistics of Marcus's deception was staggering. He had created elaborate schedules that allowed him to spend roughly equal time with each family, rotating between Ohio, Tennessee, and Florida in predictable patterns. His supposed business travel provided the perfect cover for these transitions, and his genuine charm and attention ensured that each woman felt valued and loved during his visits. Rebecca learned that Patricia and Marcus had been together for 8 years, while Grace had been in his life for 5 years. Both relationships had progressed with the same measured pace that characterized Marcus's courtship of Rebecca. He had proposed to Patricia with a diamond ring purchased on the same credit card that funded Grace's engagement ring. The 3 women had unknowingly shared not just a husband, but also jewelry, romantic gestures, and intimate promises that Marcus distributed like a carefully managed portfolio. Armed with Detective Rodriguez's evidence, Rebecca faced the most difficult decision of her adult life. She could confront Marcus directly, potentially destroying not only her own marriage, but also the relationships he maintained with Patricia and Grace. Alternatively, she could attempt to handle the situation quietly, perhaps through divorce proceedings that would minimize public humiliation for everyone involved. Rebecca chose confrontation. The decision was driven partly by anger, partly by a need for absolute truth, and partly by concern for the other women who remained unaware of their shared circumstances. She spent several days planning her approach, rehearsing conversations and preparing for various scenarios Marcus might employ to explain or excuse his behavior. The confrontation took place on a Tuesday evening in March. Marcus had returned from what he claimed was a productive sales trip to Michigan, but Rebecca knew from tracking his credit card charges that he had actually spent the week in Nashville with Patricia. She waited until Tyler and Madison were asleep, then asked Marcus to join her in their home office for a serious conversation. Rebecca began by placing printed copies of Detective Rodriguez's photographs on the desk between them. She watched Marcus's face as recognition dawned, followed by a brief moment of panic that he quickly masked with confusion and indignation. His initial response was predictably defensive. He accused Rebecca of hiring someone to spy on him, questioned her trust in their marriage, and suggested that the photographs had been doctored or misinterpreted. When Rebecca presented additional evidence, including financial records and documented proof of his multiple identities, Marcus's strategy shifted. He attempted to frame his behavior as a complex business arrangement that Rebecca was too naive to understand. He claimed to be working undercover for a federal investigation, a story so elaborate and desperate that it would have been amusing under different circumstances. As Rebecca continued presenting evidence, Marcus's composure began to crack. The man who had smoothly maintained 3 separate lives for over a decade suddenly found himself trapped by documentation he had not realized existed. His explanations became increasingly frantic and contradictory. He alternately denied the relationships, minimized their significance, and then finally admitted to emotional connections, while denying physical intimacy. The conversation stretched past midnight as Marcus employed every manipulation tactic in his considerable arsenal. He reminded Rebecca of their shared history, their children's need for stability, and the financial security he provided. He promised to end his other relationships immediately, to seek counseling, to do whatever was necessary to repair their marriage. He even broke down in tears, a display of vulnerability that Rebecca might have found convincing 18 months earlier. However, Rebecca had moved beyond the point where apologies or promises could restore her trust. She informed Marcus that she had already consulted with a divorce attorney and was prepared to file papers immediately. More significantly, she revealed her intention to contact Patricia and Grace directly, believing they deserved to know the truth about their shared situation. This final revelation triggered a transformation in Marcus that Rebecca had never witnessed before. The charming, apologetic husband disappeared, replaced by someone cold and calculating. He warned Rebecca about the consequences of destroying his other relationships, citing financial obligations and emotional attachments that she could not possibly understand. His tone became threatening as he detailed the various ways her actions could backfire, including potential legal action and social embarrassment. When Rebecca remained unmoved by his threats, Marcus's desperation escalated into rage. He accused her of selfishness, of prioritizing her wounded pride over their family's stability. He claimed that his multiple relationships had actually made him a better husband to each woman, providing him with the emotional fulfillment necessary to maintain their individual happiness. His logic was twisted, but delivered with the same confidence he had once used to convince her of his business success. The argument continued through the early morning hours, with Marcus alternating between manipulation, threats, and desperate pleas for forgiveness. Rebecca found herself marveling at his stamina for deception, his ability to generate new explanations and excuses even when confronted with overwhelming evidence. She began to understand that the man she had married was fundamentally different from the person she thought she knew. By dawn, Marcus had exhausted his arsenal of emotional manipulation and shifted into a more dangerous mindset. Rebecca sensed the change in his demeanor as he paced their home office like a trapped animal. His movements became erratic, his breathing shallow, and his eyes took on a wild quality that genuinely frightened her. She began to regret conducting this confrontation in their isolated home, away from potential witnesses or help. Marcus's breaking point came when Rebecca reiterated her plan to contact Patricia and Grace that morning. She had already obtained their phone numbers and intended to reveal Marcus's deception before he could craft new lies to explain his sudden unavailability. The prospect of losing all three women simultaneously, along with the comfortable lifestyle his deception had funded, pushed Marcus into a desperate state. He grabbed Rebecca by the shoulders, shaking her violently while demanding that she promise to keep his secrets. His grip was painful, leaving bruises that would be visible for weeks afterward. Rebecca tried to break free, but Marcus's superior strength and growing desperation made him increasingly dangerous. He began shouting about everything he would lose, the years of careful planning that would be destroyed, and the impossibility of starting over at his age. When Rebecca threatened to call the police, Marcus's control snapped completely. He shoved her against their desk with enough force to knock over their computer monitor and scatter papers across the floor. Rebecca fell hard, striking her head against the corner of a filing cabinet and feeling warm blood begin to flow from a gash above her left temple. The sight of her blood seemed to shock Marcus momentarily, but instead of helping her, he seemed to realize that he had crossed a line from which there was no return. Marcus began muttering about having no choice, about Rebecca forcing his hand by threatening to destroy everything he had built. He moved toward the desk drawer, where Rebecca knew he kept a letter opener, and she realized with crystal clarity that her life was in immediate danger. The man she had trusted for 15 years, who had fathered her children and shared her bed, was now prepared to harm her to protect his web of lies. Rebecca's survival instincts kicked in with startling intensity. Despite her head injury and growing dizziness, she managed to grab a heavy glass paperweight from the desk and swing it at Marcus as he reached for the letter opener. The blow caught him across the temple, stunning him long enough for Rebecca to scramble toward the office door. However, Marcus recovered quickly and lunged after her, catching her ankle and sending her crashing to the floor in the hallway. The physical struggle that followed was chaotic and terrifying. Marcus, desperate to prevent Rebecca from exposing his secrets, fought with the strength of someone who had nothing left to lose. Rebecca, fighting for her life and the safety of her children sleeping upstairs, found reserves of strength she never knew she possessed. They crashed into walls, knocked over furniture, and left a trail of blood from Rebecca's head wound throughout the lower level of their home. The turning point came when their struggle carried them into the kitchen. Rebecca managed to reach the block of kitchen knives on the counter, grabbing the largest one just as Marcus wrapped his hands around her throat. In a moment of pure survival instinct, she drove the blade into his shoulder, causing him to release his grip and stagger backward in shock and pain. The sight of the knife protruding from his shoulder seemed to snap Marcus back to reality. He looked at Rebecca with a mixture of pain, rage, and something that might have been regret. Blood was flowing freely from his wound, matching the blood that covered Rebecca's face and clothing from her head injury. For a moment they stared at each other like strangers, both breathing heavily and trying to process how their marriage had devolved into violence. Rebecca used Marcus's momentary shock to grab her phone and dial 911. She managed to provide their address and request police and medical assistance before Marcus attempted to take the phone away from her. However, his shoulder wound had weakened him considerably, and Rebecca was able to evade his grasp long enough for help to arrive. The police found them both in the kitchen, separated by the island counter, with Rebecca clutching the phone and Marcus pressing a towel against his bleeding shoulder. The scene looked like something from a horror movie, blood spattered across multiple rooms, furniture overturned, and both participants showing obvious signs of a violent struggle. Rebecca's head wound required immediate medical attention, while Marcus's shoulder injury needed surgical repair. During the initial police interviews, Marcus attempted to portray the incident as a domestic dispute that had gotten out of hand. He claimed that Rebecca had attacked him without provocation after discovering what he characterized as a brief affair. However, the evidence Rebecca had accumulated over weeks of investigation, combined with Detective Rodriguez's testimony, painted a very different picture of systematic deception and desperate violence. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of Marcus's double life to authorities and inevitably to Patricia and Grace. Both women were devastated to learn about his other relationships and expressed shock at the violence he had displayed toward Rebecca. Patricia filed for divorce immediately, while Grace broke off their engagement and moved back to her hometown in Georgia to recover from the emotional trauma. Marcus was charged with assault, battery, and attempted murder based on Rebecca's testimony and the physical evidence from their home. His elaborate financial schemes also attracted the attention of the Internal Revenue Service and state taxation authorities, as he had been filing separate tax returns in each state and using false social security numbers to maintain his multiple identities. The legal consequences extended far beyond the domestic violence charges, encompassing fraud, identity theft, and tax evasion. Rebecca spent 3 days in the hospital, recovering from her head injury and receiving treatment for the psychological trauma of the attack. Tyler and Madison stayed with Rebecca's sister during this period, shielded from the most disturbing details but aware that their father had hurt their mother and would not be returning home. The children's adjustment to this new reality would require months of family counseling and patient explanation. The divorce proceedings were swift and decisive. Marcus's multiple identities and hidden assets complicated the financial settlement, but Rebecca's attorney was able to secure the majority of their legitimate assets along with temporary spousal support. The house was sold, and Rebecca used her portion of the proceeds to relocate to a smaller community where she and the children could start fresh without constant reminders of their traumatic experience. Rebecca's recovery was gradual, but determined. She expanded her freelance graphic design business into a full-time career, finding that her work provided both financial independence and creative satisfaction. Tyler and Madison adapted to their new circumstances with the resilience typical of children, though both required ongoing counseling to process their father's deception and violence. The most profound change in Rebecca's life was her relationship with trust itself. She had learned that even 15 years of apparent devotion could mask fundamental deception, and this knowledge initially made her suspicious of everyone around her. However, with time and professional help, she began to understand that Marcus's capacity for deception was not a reflection of her judgment, but rather evidence of his sophisticated manipulation skills. Rebecca's experience serves as a powerful reminder that sometimes the people closest to us harbor secrets that can shatter our understanding of reality itself. Her willingness to investigate inconsistencies in Marcus's behavior, despite her desire to trust him, ultimately saved her from years of continued deception and potentially saved her life during their final confrontation. The courage Rebecca showed in defending herself and rebuilding her life afterward demonstrates that survival is possible even after the most devastating betrayals. Today, she works as an advocate for other women who have discovered infidelity or deception in their marriages, helping them navigate the complex emotions and practical challenges that follow such revelations. If Rebecca's experience resonates with you, or if you found her journey of survival and recovery inspiring, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was living a double life? How did you handle the situation, And what advice would you give to others facing similar circumstances? Please subscribe to True Crime Seat for more stories of survival, resilience, and the complex realities of human relationships. Every subscription helps us continue sharing these important stories and supporting those who have faced similar challenges. Remember, even in our darkest moments, we possess the strength to fight for our lives and build something better from the pieces that remain.